Welcome to another Ideas That Matters conversation. I have here as a guest somebody who I've interacted with in a pseudo-anonymous way before we actually made contact in a meme page, but he is also somebody with an extensive background in philosophy, both studying and teaching. So this is Dan or Daniel Hieber, and he's done his work at Missouri State University and University of Kansas. Currently, if correct me if I'm wrong, you're currently teaching at Ozark Technical Community College and also at Iowa State University, or did that one come to an end?
That one was a former lecturing position. I'm an adjunct at Missouri State. I'm full-time faculty at Ozarks Technical Community College.
Okay, so there we go. So now we got connected to each other in kind of a weird way. You run a Facebook page which has a very interesting title,
Yes.
Pedagogical Memes
Mhm.
on Philosophical Themes. And, a lot of these Facebook pages with memes have kind of tongue-in-cheek
Yep.
titles to them, but this one is actually very descriptive, right? These are pedagogical. They're intended not just to screw around and say something funny, but to teach people something. And generally, when you post something, you also give like, here's some resources. You want to know more about this. And they're philosophical themes in a
Mhm.
very broad sense. So, the first thing I want to ask you is what got you started actually doing this? I mean, a lot of us make memes, but frankly, a lot of the memes that us professors make typically aren't very good. Yours are very good, you
Oh,
know,
thank you. Thank you.
high impact, you could say. So, how did you, what made you say, yeah, I could actually do something productive here with memes?
Okay. Well, thank you, Greg. And let me again, thank you for having me on here. I mean, just been
Oh,
a long
sure.
time enjoyer of your content. We can talk about this later, but I've been using your videos as resources in my online classes for, as long as I've been teaching them, which actually only goes back to about 2016 or so. But whenever I was sort of forced into, teaching online, which I was sort of willfully dragging my feet on that for a long time. But whenever I was finally forced to do it, I found your cache of video resources to be very fortuitous for the compressed time frame that I was putting together my online.
Oh, yeah. When you have to put together a class on the fly. I mean, this is,
Yeah.
let's go do a little bit of a digression here. A lot of people, I think, they've got this genteel conception of what being a instructor period is like, lots of oak paneling and, classrooms, everything's kind of sedate. Maybe you bring up a controversial topic in a class and people debate it back and forth. And it's just not like that. And,
Right.
when you're doing community college, very often, budgets haven't been set yet. And then suddenly a class opens up and something falls in your lap and you got to take it on.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, talk a little bit about your experience as an instructor with that. I mean,
Okay.
I
Yeah.
know, I know for myself, sometimes I get called up like a week before the semester begins, and somebody will be like, "Hey, can you do an intro class?" And I'll be like, "Well, sure," but to have to do classes that you don't really have a big background in yet when you're first starting out,
Mhm.
that can be pretty trying, especially if you get like, you got 2 weeks.
Yeah, and we'll start there, and then I'll merge into your initial question. But yeah, I I did some teaching immediately out of grad school. I was floating around in the Iowa, Nebraska area. Wasn't really happy in that geographical area. There was an opening at Ozarks Technical Community College back in 2007, which is where my parents still live in the area, in the town where I did my undergraduate studies, and so I had some geographical and family ties, to it, and so I was eager to come back here. So I applied for the position. I was accepted. I was hired full-time faculty member, and like I said, earlier, I was sort of deliberately dragging my feet in terms of online teaching. Administration was really pushing the online teaching agenda, and I'm like, no, I'm fine with my seated classes. I had that very sort of
Yeah.
old school didactic, approach to my classes. I sort of had this, what I recognize as a wrong attitude now, but at the time I had this attitude that, well, maybe certain classes will translate well into the online environment, but philosophy isn't one of them. Philosophy, it's peripatetic, and you have a lecturer at the front, and you have the students, and there's the interaction, and I had that attitude for a long time. And back in 2016, I was basically told that you're going to be you're going to be teaching online classes for us. And so I sort of a month or so in advance, having to come up with, well, how am I going to do this? Because I had just my standard lectures, but that's just I gave them organically during every class
Right.
session, and then I didn't really have any material, and I hadn't even really looked to see what kind of materials were available. So I get onto YouTube, and I start Google searching, and there were a few resources that I found. I mean, what I found alarming, and I'm sure that you're aware of this, is the number of bad resources that are
Oh,
out
right. Yeah,
there.
yeah.
And so one of the reasons why I wanted to provide an abundance of additional resources for the online classes that I was teaching was just to sort of curate and say, no, these are good ones. It's like, you're on your own. If you're going to be just doing some random Google search for videos, it's like you will find something, but there's no guarantee about the quality of it. And so I came upon your YouTube channel, and like I said, I found it to be just an outstanding resource for my
Well,
classes.
thanks.
I do, and especially some of your deeper cuts, for your YouTube channel. I made a list, in preparation. I made some notes in preparation for
Okay.
the interview as to how many of your videos I actually use. I use 14 of your videos in my classes, which is just your standard introduction to philosophy, and then I teach an introduction to ethics class. And the ones that I really like are, like I said earlier, are your deep cuts. Is like whenever you're talking about James Rachel's, Ruth Benedict, James Rachel's argument against cultural relativism. It's like that is so niche,
Yeah, yeah.
that is, but I cover that material, and so for me, it's just like not having to record my own lecture video about that. It was during this initial setup of my online classes, I was like, thank goodness there's already an existing video out there that I can use that is of high quality, that would be presenting the material that the way I would present it, and yet it's going to save me recording time and production time and editing time, because all of that, it takes just as long
Oh,
to
right.
process the video and edit the video as it does to compile the notes. And I mean, there's just so much of that,
Yeah,
it's
and when you're first starting out with it too, I mean, there's such a big learning curve. I've had times where I forgot to turn the camera on.
yeah,
When I give a
yeah,
lecture, and then I get to the end, and I'm like, oh crap, got to redo the whole 20-minute thing.
yeah.
Um,
You forget to plug in the microphone or something. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well,
So
yeah.
I was,
So, what got you? Let's go back to that original question. Why memes? I mean, we're going to talk about their pedagogical value in a
yeah.
bit, but they're also entertaining. Was that part of it for you as well, or?
Well, just like most people, just you have a passing awareness of memes. You see them, you laugh at them, you move on with your life. But because I was already, I started my meme page in January of 2020, so I had already
Okay.
been teaching online for about 4 or so years at that point, and just trying to add some degree of levity to the study of philosophy, because it can come across to students as very heavy, serious topics. I mean, you're just sort of burdened with 2,500 years of intellectual tradition, and it sort of comes with it that it's going to be dry, and it's going to be verbose, and it's going to be esoteric, and you're not going to be able to connect with it. And so I was really struggling with seated classes. It's really easy to sneak in some humor
Right.
during your lectures, but with their online classes, you can't really, the dynamics is different. You can't really do that. And so I was trying to think of, well, how can I add some degree of levity to this material? And so I started, stumbling upon some philosophical memes that friends from graduate school had shared. And then I sort of, well, maybe, that sort of spurred the idea, well, maybe I can actually use this as a teaching tool in my own classes. And I still primarily use the memes as mnemonic devices
Okay.
and as reviewing material, just so the students can sort of have a reminder. Oh yeah, we talked about the distinction between act and rule utilitarianism. It's like, oh yeah, we talked about the logical positivist or whatever the topic of the meme is. But whenever I first started collecting those, I had this cache of 60 70 memes, some of which I had copied from other pages and some were original, and I needed some sort of repository to keep them. And so I started this meme page, and initially it was like me and eight buddies from grad school that were following my page, and it just sort of gradually started building from there. And it initially I didn't put all of the learning resources embedded as captions. Initially, again, it was just for a place that I could go log on, bring up some images, put them on
Okay.
overhead and show them. And then the idea was that for my, seated classes, I could just talk about them. And for the videos I would make for my online classes, it would be a scenario like this, where it would just be picture in picture, be the meme on the screen, and then a little box of me talking about the meme and sort of explaining it. But once I started getting a little bit of a following, I realized that it was going to be kind of necessary to give some degree of explanation, especially for some of the
Now, I
esoteric
think you're
memes.
right about that. Why? Because a lot of the meme pages out there on Facebook or people sharing things on Twitter or other things. I suppose Instagram must be a big thing, although I'm not on Instagram. They don't give much explanation. They'll
Yeah.
just and they're often engaging in shit posting,
Yes,
about
yes, yeah,
stuff.
it is much more about that. And I am on Instagram, but I have like 180 followers on Instagram. I'm coming up on
Okay.
29,000 followers on Facebook. And so Facebook is the primary basis of the following of the page. But yeah, it was sort of once I started getting a little bit of a following, and that really started to happen. The page in its current form started to crystallize around the 2,000 follower mark. And I started feeling this a little bit of a burden of responsibility, because previously it was like, well,
Yeah.
people follow the page, they can follow the page, and if they get the memes, they get them, and I was like, well, I'm not going to dumb anything down, and I had that sort of was like, just the name pedagogical memes and philosophical themes, it's self-descriptive, and if they want to research it, they can. And I thought that was sort of losing sight of the original charter. The idea behind it is that instead of just having something funny for a very exclusive audience, I
Right.
wanted something funny that could actually get people into, as an audience, as people interested in the material, not just people that already understood it and then laughed at it, but people that would want to understand it so that they could laugh at it, so that they could find some entertainment value in it. So that's when I started, adding all of those additional, links and the resources that I was embedding in the captions.
So, as somebody who works a lot with memes and I'm sure has like had lots of conversations and reflections on this sort of thing, um, you put a meme out there, you give an explanation. Like you said, it can have a great sort of introductory function, getting people interested. They see something funny, they're like, "Oh, maybe I should learn more about this sort of idea or distinction or argument or something like that." Now, can memes be useful for, let's just call it like higher order or higher level teaching? Or do they have to give way and let other more traditional ways of teaching take the stage? I guess what I'm asking is, what is the potential that you see for memes? Is it just at this introductory level, or can they do more than that?
Well, I think that memes are inherently philosophical. I mean, the connection between
Oh,
the word meme and mimesis,
yeah, yeah.
it's the same root, So you had Aristotle and Plato talking about mimesis 2,500 years ago, and of course, we have memes now, which is part of that same root word. And just this imitation of something, this you see something and you recognize it. There's a pattern, there's an imitation there's a certain sameness, and be able to apply that to something else. it's that sort of, capturing the universal through the particular, so to speak,
Okay.
using
Yeah.
sort of Aristotelian language. And so I do think that there's at the surface level, you can look at it, you can see it, you can get it, maybe chuckle a little LOL in your head, and then again, just sort of keep on scrolling and move on. But then I think that there are not every meme is like this, and it's just it's a content business. I'm
Right.
cranking memes a lot, and so they don't always reach that level. Sometimes there's a lot of this low effort memes where it's like I need to keep the page active. I'm struggling for content, but then there's ones that I really had some inspiration on, and it's kind of disappointing because some of the memes that I'm most proud of will get like 15 likes, and then there's some that took me 38 seconds to write and post. It'll get 9,000 likes. It'll get 1,200 shares.
Yeah.
They'll be massively popular, and I say massively popular, of course, when you're talking about the realm of philosophy meme pages. You have to relativize that a little bit.
That's true. Yeah.
But it is kind of funny to see the ones that I'm most proud of versus the ones that actually get the most hits and the most interaction with. There's like they're very seldom the same.
Well, now, is that because the ones that you're most proud of do require more interpretive thought or background knowledge to make sense of them? So they can't appeal to as wide of an audience as, something. I'll just make up something out of the air, with the Descartes. Everyone loves the, I don't think, therefore
Right.
he
Yeah.
stops existing, which of course is not remotely what he's saying, but
Right.
that's, like you said, low hanging fruit. I mean,
Yeah.
anybody who's taken an intro class or even spent much time looking at philosophy can get that. But other ones, they take more on the part of the, what do you call it? The meme enjoyer, meme reader. Is there a name for the people who take in memes?
Yeah. Meme enjoyer. I like. I,
Yeah.
I don't know that there actually is a piece of vocabulary for that, but yeah. I mean, there's the internet. Facebook is rife with pages that are making Kant puns, and like you
Yeah, yeah.
Descartes, it's just like stop thinking and he poofs out of existence. There's that, and that is what I was specifically trying to stay away from with my page. It's like, well, that's too easy. It's not informative. It's a gross representation of what what the person's actual position is. And so I did want there to be some pedagogical value to the memes that I was that I was posting. And going back to your earlier question about the ones that I sort of put the most amount of work in, and I'm the most proud of, that get 40 likes and 5 shares. I'm
Yeah.
I'm actually quite okay with that, because I do think that that the people that do appreciate that, it's like, well, that's what keeps me interested in it. I don't like to speak to the lowest, entry level, point. I think that there should be some aspirational content to the memes that you produce, and so I don't
Yeah.
I'm all at that level. Just I like to slide those in there every once in a while. I like to give it kind of a good mix between what a 100 level student can look at, get a laugh and enjoy, but I also don't want to just be constantly appealing to that 100 level sensibility. I want people that are very informed to look at my memes and to like them. And I got to say, I've been very impressed with some of my followers. The comments that they've made in the comments section. I'll just mention a couple of them. Just off the top of my head. Matt Boo guy, who is prominent on a lot of meme pages. That guy really knows this stuff, especially about Hegel. He's a big fan of yours. German idealism, more generally. He
Yeah.
reads Hegel in the original German. I mean, the guy, and as far as I know, he's not a traditional academic. As far as I know, he's employed outside of academia. But the guy really knows his stuff. And there's this other follower, Johnny Cerna, that I have. And his knowledge of 20th century analytic philosophy, logic, epistemology, philosophy of mind, I I wouldn't want to go up against him in a college bowl style, trivia,
Yeah, yeah.
game. I mean, the guy is exceptionally knowledgeable. And so I have followers of that caliber that are in mind whenever I'm making the memes, because it's like as soon as I start to lose them, it's just like, well,
Yeah,
now
yeah.
I failed with the original charter of my meme page.
I mean, you can say, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, because I'm looking at it from the outside, that around your page, you have a online community that is coalesced and people are talking to each other. It's not just everybody chiming in with their own comments on it and then nobody, responding to or engaging or even arguing with each other about stuff. A lot of these provoke a good bit of back and forth comments in these threads, right?
Mhm. Yeah, and it's I'm both surprised and humbled, by that. The like I said, the idea that just that I have followers asking about the books that I have on my shelves. I just
Yeah.
I again, I'm humbled by that, because I've had people that have been to my house that have just walked past my bookcase and never asked a single question about anything on my shelf. And the fact that some random person from the internet would be interested in what I'm reading or what I've read, or what my thoughts are or something. I mean, it's just for me, with my background with zero self-esteem, it's like, oh wow, someone's interested in in something that I have to say. And just like,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm more than happy, to speak to that, and I'm very glad to have the follower base that I do. That is, because there are so many threads. I mean, there's this stereotype of the comment section, about how it's
Right, right.
free for all of people disrespecting one another, and just cursing and just going ad hominem immediately. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen on my page. I've seen it happen, but for the most part, whenever people are engaged in dialogue, temperatures might get heated at a certain point, but they will, at least attempt to formulate coherent thoughts and arguments, not necessarily trying to convince the other person, but at least letting it be known that, hey, you might not agree with me, but I haven't just randomly latched on to a belief
Right, right.
here. I can justify why I'm saying what I'm saying, or why I believe what I believe, or why I interpret this in a way that is inconsistent with the way that you might interpret it. And I'm very glad to have that. And like I said, I don't know that I had anything to do with that, other than just trying to keep it at a very high level of product, and consistent product, and just the very just the topics, and the issues that I address in the memes have a tendency to bring in this self-selecting crowd, and as a result of that, that there has been some really good conversations that have taken place in the comment sections.
I've on my part in social media and on YouTube, I've blocked pretty liberally when people act like jerks to myself or
Yeah.
to others. And I found that that did help to overall improve the level of engagement and comments. You get rid of the bad actors who are just there to, like, I don't know, stir crap up or be jerks to each other. So did you find yourself having to do that at all with your page? I mean, Facebook is kind of, the wild
Yeah,
woolly
I uh,
west.
I really haven't. I have a couple of, once I got above 4 or 5 thousand followers, I found it necessary to set up some automated moderating controls, just because
Okay.
I couldn't go on and police everything that everybody was saying. And so I have a couple of restrictions in there, in terms of the kind of language that'll automatically get nixed. And so and I've had some followers send me, emails saying, hey, what happened to my comment? It's like,
Yeah, yeah.
I never even saw the comment, because Facebook had already nixed it. And sometimes, I've gone in and looked at it after the fact, and it's like, oh well, there actually wasn't really anything wrong with that particular comment, and I can unhide it, if the
Yeah.
if necessary. So I'm not saying that hasn't happened. It could have happened, and I was just unaware of it because of the automated moderating controls that Facebook made available to me. But again, for the most part, it's been very, very civil. And there was and even just a couple of days ago, I had this meme that I had reposted from another page that I was just sort of scrolling along. It was from Trad West. And,
Okay.
and I'm unfamiliar with that meme page, and I'm just scrolling along. And whenever I see a meme, I just click the share button. I didn't research the meme page. I
You
didn't even
didn't vet it
remember
or anything,
looking
you
at
could
it, right?
say.
And I think that's part of it, is just that academic urge to give a citation for everything, just to let, it's like,
Yeah.
this was not original to me. And so I just, if I share it, then if I've already attributed the source. And within a couple of minutes, I had some followers, making comments like, "Hey, it's like, what are you doing, sharing from this page?" And I kind of had to go, and again, they weren't accusing me of having the attitude of,
Right.
the admins of that page, but it was very civil, and it was just, just like, you might want to double check. And there was a couple of people that were kind of expressing disappointment. It's like, wow, I can't believe that you're sharing, this person's material on your page. And then, because I trust my followers, and so that caused me to kind of turn around. It's like, well, what's going on with this page? How bad could it actually be? And there's like, it didn't take me very long to scroll through. It's like, oh yeah, there is some stuff in there that I don't really want associated with my page. And so I went,
Yeah, yeah.
I took a screenshot of the meme, because I don't think it was, I think that Trad West had taken the meme from someone else without attributing it, and was posting it on their page. And so I didn't feel bad about just taking a screenshot of, saving the photo, and then, deleting that previous post. But again, I think that the civility on my page has really been more ground up than top down. I don't know that
Yeah.
I don't know that there's been a lot of me that has been resulted from that. I think it's just a self-selecting crowd, that wants to, be engaged, and not that, to be exposed to those ideas, to laugh at, those ideas, to just have that sort of
Yeah.
shared commonality, because it, there is a certain amount of knowledge that is necessary to find the stuff humorous, and it's just, rather than having to explain why the meme is funny to somebody else, you can just sort of go on and interact with people that already get the joke.
That actually steers the conversation. As I was thinking about this, one of the questions I wanted to ask you about is people who take memes too seriously. Like maybe they don't get the joke because they don't get jokes, or I don't know, a topic in it gets them kind of set off or something, and they can't see the humor in it, or some of them maybe are trying to one up people in some way. And I post memes occasionally, nowhere near as much as you do, and I get people, most of the people will be like, yeah, that's funny, they'll maybe throw in a meme of their own or something like that, and then every once in a while you get people who they something goes wrong and they take that meme very, very seriously, and maybe they think that like you're endorsing the position being represented or the argument or whatever, and they get real worked up about it. And so now, do you get people doing that with your memes? Because I don't see everything on your page, but I can't imagine that you don't run into people like that. And I was kind of curious too about, well, what do you think the best way of addressing them is? I mean, you can't just say, "Oh my God, you totally missed the joke. What's wrong with you?" Because that's not going to be
Right.
helpful.
Right. Yeah. And you don't want to just be dismissive of people's, attitudes and concerns, because if they're taking the time to interact, with your page, I don't want to just go in with the assumption that, oh, this person's, fragile, and this person's a snowflake, and this
Yeah,
person's
yeah.
has a victim mentality, which I'm not denying the existence of people like that. I just don't want to enter into an interaction with that assumption. So yeah, as a matter of fact, just today, a few hours ago, I had this image that my daughter sent to me this morning, that she had found on a subreddit, that was doing a variation of that old pun, putting Descartes before the horse,
Oh, right. Yeah, I saw that
except
one. Yeah.
except for it was the whores, because
Yeah.
it's a reference to this recent film, Poor Things. I think, so I haven't watched the film yet, but I did get the reference. And I had a follower make some sort of a comment about, that I shouldn't be, giving any airtime to a slur, referring to the word whore. And I took that as an opportunity to say, well, yeah, maybe perhaps there are some words that shouldn't, and of course I was invoking the use mention distinction.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that there is that if I'm sharing an image, I'm not using that word. I'm sort of mentioning it in the specific context of someone else said this, and I have an image of it up there. But I just took that as an opportunity to enter into the larger subject of it's like, just like, well, maybe there are certain words that we should remove from the lexicon, but it's like, is this one of them? And and then I went into like the like because there is this phenomenon called slut shaming, and slut,
Right,
of
right.
course,
Yeah.
is a synonym for whore. And if whore is off bounds, then slut's off bounds, which means we can't talk about slut shaming. And it seems important to talk about slut shaming. It's just like that's if we're going to be disallowed from using certain kind of words, then
Our vocabulary really shrinks to
how
the
are
to
you
the
going to be addressing that pervasive issue? And so rather than just sort of pushing back, I think that just in keeping with the theme of the page, trying to keep it pedagogical and philosophical, is like, well, maybe I'm in the wrong here. And again, I am open to having my opinion changed on that. Maybe I am completely in the wrong for having shared that. I kind of don't think I am. I gave my defense.
yeah, I don't think so either. I wonder, so like, if you think about what we would do in the academic classroom, now, there are some terms that, like, if you're reading something and it's got the N word and you deliberately say, well, I'm going to read it out loud because we have to, we can't censor anything. Well, that's just being a jerk, and unnecessarily so. But that's sort of at one extreme, right? And then there's all sorts of other things where, yes, people can take offense, and okay, some people could more reasonably take offense, maybe some less so. But we do have to be able to talk about it. And it seems like there's certain contexts where that, like if a philosophy classroom, a meme page where maybe there should be looser strictures on it, right? As opposed to being in, I don't know, a corporate meeting to set a budget. And, if you're introducing, a word like horror there, you'd be like, well, what are you doing? What's going on with that? How could that possibly have anything to do with what you're doing and not be an expression of misogyny or something like that, right? But I think in the philosophy classroom or a meme page, maybe there's more latitude for it.
Yeah, I think certainly more so on a meme page than in a philosophy classroom. Now that being said, I will almost sometimes purposefully in lecture let a curse word fly
Okay.
just for the purpose of it grabs students' attention. It's like if they're starting to doze off, they'll wake up. It's like, what did he just cuss? Did he just say something? And so that's part of the reason why I'll do it. And then sometimes, it's just to, let the students know that it's like, again, I'm not taking this too seriously. It's just like you can
Yeah.
have some levity to this. It's like we don't need to have this sort of, this sort of archaic imposed, structure. I'm not an Oxford Don. I'm not wearing a black cloak, as I'm delivering, the material to try to make it a little bit more approachable. But there's definitely more of a context with the meme page than in a philosophy classroom. But I just had you talking about, the language and what people are free to say. I just had a colleague of mine get written up, have a conversation with the dean because he was teaching a 100 level humanities class,
Okay.
and he was covering the artwork of Tom Wesselman, who was this a pop artist in the 1980s. And there's this one famous image by Tom Wesselman where there's this woman with kind of a cartoon woman, like the old Duran Duran cover art. He did that kind of stuff in the 80s. And there's this woman without a face, but with these, lips, and all you see is her, and you see this outline, and she's in profile, and she's obviously naked. And there's a phone there, and there's a rose. And so there's all this imagery about sexual availability and sexual arousal that are embedded in the image. And my friend and colleague, in describing the painting, used the phrase erect nipple. And there was a student in class that got offended to that and demanded to be transferred to another section. And so it's like the phrase erect nipple, if you're talking about a painting in which there's an erect nipple, again, there's a context for it. It's just like, it's just, well, it would be odd if you worked that into, a discussion about transcendental idealism.
Yeah.
But if you're talking about an image that has an erect nipple in it, then it seems perfectly appropriate to talk about an erect nipple in that context. But he was really,
Yeah.
mhm.
I mean, that one reminds me of like people talking about white and dark meat with chickens so they wouldn't have to say breast or thigh or stuff like that. You know, if you were
Now,
to ask me, what are some really, offensive bodily terms?
yeah,
Erect nipple would not come to
is not
mind
one of
as
them.
like number one or something.
But there is a section, whenever I'm covering cons ethics, there is I do some self-editing whenever I'm reading something which is in the textbook, and I
Yeah,
have
yeah,
it on the screen, and there's that famous quote whenever Kant is talking about the goodwill and the stepmotherly provision, which of course is misogynistic. But there's a word that occurs right before he uses the phrase stepmotherly provision, which is a synonym for selfish. And
oh,
the
yeah,
word bears an unfortunate resemblance to a racial epithet. And
yep,
I won't, it's so close, I won't even say it out loud in class. I skip over that word and I'll say selfish in real time, and then I'll explain, why I say, because I don't want a
yeah.
recording of me because it is so similar to that racial epithet.
I use the word stingy as
Yes.
a sub for that.
Uh,
And it's interesting because even like Alistair McIntyre is still using that term
mm,
like in After Virtue in the 80s,
mm,
we're kind of stuck with it here and there. But actually, I mean, this is an interesting topic of conversation. I do some other things. Like if I know when I'm reading a text that what has been translated by usually Oxford, Cambridge types as man or mankind or men, when I know that it's like the Greek anthropos or the Latin, homo, which is not gendered in the same way as like aner or gune or things like that in Greek. I will just say person or people or they or stuff like that, regardless of what the text actually says. And none of my students bat an eye. The only people who tend to get offended are like older colleagues who think I'm messing around with the text. What do you do something kind of similar, or do you just stick with what's there? I mean, it seems like we're taking liberties, right? But it's not that big of a liberty, and why shouldn't we take liberties of that sort?
yeah, and I mean the sensibilities are different, and it's just the if you can avoid offending somebody, then you should seek to avoid them. It's like in a context where it doesn't matter, or it's unavoidable. Talking about an erect nipple if you're describing a work of art that has an erect nipple in it.
Yeah,
That seems, again, I don't see an issue with that. But it's the that it goes back to that doctrine of avoidability. It's like, can you say something else that will communicate the exact same idea without the risk of offending somebody? And I don't regard that as sort of kowtowing to snowflakes or
political correctness,
fragile
or
people, right?
yeah, yeah,
It does just seem to be a sensible direction to take. Just that there are like just language changes, and just like my own awareness, and like you said that you've done something similar in regard to that word that bears an unfortunate resemblance to a racial epithet. It's like it would seem, because the pronunciation is so similar, it's just like it would seem weird to me. It's like, why even do this? Why even risk, somebody taking it and then having to explain after the fact, well, no, that's not what I said, that's not what I meant, this is what the word is,
comes from Old Norse, yeah, yeah,
Right.
all
Yeah.
that kind of
Now it
stuff.
just seems like you're trying to justify something. But it's like if you can avoid it, just
Yeah,
go
yeah.
avoid it and move on. It doesn't affect the understanding, whether you use the word selfish, whether you use the word stingy. The same ideas is being communicated there.
That's right. Yeah. So something else I wanted to ask you, this is shifting topic somewhat. So
Mhm.
you mentioned, taking things from other meme pages, and I imagine that you look at quite a few
Yeah.
other meme pages just to like, find good material, stay on top of things, think of, I could probably do this one better. Are there any that you particularly like or recommend as a connoisseur of memes?
As a connoisseur, there's a couple of meme pages that I have really good working relationships with. Radically Questionable Metaphysics,
Oh,
Thin Meme Veils.
yeah,
Really like him. He actually disappeared for a while. There's about a 6 or so month window, last year where yeah, of course, with these internet sort of relationships, you never really know. It's like, well, did something happen to the person? The person just get bored with
right.
what they were doing, then move on with their life? Did they get married? Did they get divorced? I mean, just what happened. But as it turned out, he was just in the process of applying to graduate school and was super focused on the studies. And so whenever he reappeared, I sent him a message, just a meme page to meme page message saying, hey, just glad to see you. I was worried about you. And it's we're very very cordial with one another. We don't know each other's real names. Of course, now people know my real name, and so it's getting out there. It's his page. The page I found it on JSTOR is another one that I have a
Oh, yeah,
very
that's a
good
good one.
relationship with, and I've been in contact with those with the admins. There's at least two admins. There might be more than two, or it might just be some former admins that I'm thinking of that have since moved on, just sort of bequeathed that page to other admins. And there's another one that's not too active anymore. That the Mindless Philosophers is another one that I follow. Um,
Okay.
but yeah, off the top of my head, Radically Questionable Metaphysics, I found it on JSTOR, or some of the meme pages that I follow. And there's another guy. I mentioned this guy, Matt Guy, a little bit ago. He recently started a meme page, something to the effect of, actually, I take it back. It's not a meme page. It's a Facebook page that occasionally posts memes in regard to Hegel. And
Okay.
it was something to the effect of, every sentence of Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, one
Right.
sentence at a time, or something
Yeah.
like that. He's the guy with the admin of that is the guy I was talking about, earlier. Was exceptionally knowledgeable in Hegel and German idealism more generally, and again reads Hegel in the original German, and so that's another one that's one of his recent ventures, and he's been a long time contributor to my page and to other pages that I've just mentioned.
Yeah. So another question I'd wanted to ask you, in a way, memes are kind of ephemeral. You throw them out there. There's a vast body of them. They're replacing each other.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, we can talk about meme formats, and I also want to get your take on that. We can talk about those as being kind of enduring, right? We're still using some meme formats and adding new content in from 10
Yes.
years ago, but individual memes, you know, do they have the potential for really sticking with us within the internet, or is it kind of the case that whatever you make, sooner or later it drops to the bottom of the page and then it's kind of just gone. It exists in the archive,
Mhm.
but people aren't people aren't going back to it over and over again. So that then you're like, well, why the hell am I doing this, right?
Mhm.
Or what's the idea with that? I mean, sort of like when you do a podcast, once you get past the 500th episode, all of the podcast aggregators that you've got it in, they don't keep it anymore, right? So if you got 1,000 episodes on the place where you have it, they're still there, but Apple doesn't have it, Google doesn't have it, Spotify doesn't have it. So, I mean, does that ever strike you and you're like, I made so much content, but
Yeah, the thirst for new content, and initially whenever I had the page and it was starting to grow, and I'm around like the 7,000-8,000 follower mark, I had this idea. It's like, well, now people will, new followers I have, like a cache of, like 600, 700 memes that they can just, so I don't actually have to continue to provide new memes. They can just go back and enjoy the old ones that I've already done. It's just like, no, I mean, it's, they'll follow the page. And if they happen to be scrolling through Facebook 2 days later and see another meme,
Yeah.
they might share it. They might just move on with their life. And so it is, like you were saying, it's like you constantly have to provide new content just so you're showing up in the feed. And so there's a little bit of content creator fatigue, involved in that, because it does seem like you're just sort of producing variations of stuff that you've already done, or I've already visited this
Mm.
topic. And but thankfully, with the world of memes, there are always new templates that are coming about, and even some of the old ones, they're holding in, they're strong. And if you can find a novel way of using an existing template format, it really adds to it. And there's one template format that is Anakin Skywalker and Padme,
Yeah.
where it's that 4 panel one where he's saying, the original text is like, I'm going to change the world, and then Padme says, for the better, right? And I did a version of that one a couple of years back where it was, Anakin, but I put the word, Marx, go over the top of his head. And he was like, in this hypothetical dialogue with Hegel saying, I'm going to use your philosophy. And then Padme says, like, well, in a way that's consistent with the way I
I think
intended.
I've seen that one. Yeah.
And then in the last panel, she's turned upside down. And so I found that a way of sort of using this existing meme template that was kind of stale, but just made a little bit of a tweak to it and modified it and presented it in a way that sort of refreshed that meme template that people thought they were already familiar with, and at the same time was communicating this idea about the relationship between Marx's dialectic and Hegel's dialectic.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great example. So meme templates, I mean, in a way, they're just sort of like empty forms that have some structure. Let's say I won't even say content necessarily, because the chief thing is to add content that somehow makes a witty point or makes people say, "Oh yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way." Something that grips them. The format is doing a lot of work because it says here's something familiar. But then the content has to be, I mean, you could just put in whatever nonsense you want and you could put a meme out there and everyone would be like, what the hell is this crap?
Yes.
That's technically possible. But if you want it to be a good meme, then you've got to find some way to, like you said, I mean, you can monkey around with changing the format slightly. So like putting Padme upside down, that's an interesting twist. But you don't necessarily have to do that, right? You can come up with some verbiage or another image that you're inserting that really captures people's ideas. I mean, if somebody was going to start out creating memes, would you advise them, as somebody who's put a lot of work and thought into it, stick with templates at the start, right? Sort of like, you're going to learn some music, practice some scales,
Right.
right? And then do some drills. Don't try to solo on the guitar right off the bat.
Yeah, it just sort of from my own method and what I do is like there's certain things. There's a template that you try to use, or there's a philosophical idea that you're in search of a template for. And so
Okay.
you can sort of, you can reverse engineer an idea and find a template, or sometimes you just see a template. Oh my gosh, how am I going to use that template? And in the meme world, a lot of those templates are just long-standing, just very popular memes. Everyone's familiar with them, but then all of a sudden there will be something that happens in the zeitgeist, and all of a sudden there's this massive proliferation of this particular image that's been made into a macro, and people are putting their own stuff on, and you kind of have to get on board, with that, just to in this continuing race to remain relevant, and to connect with the people that have made the conscious decision to follow the page. There's always that
Yeah, yeah.
burden of responsibility. that you can't just continue to reuse Drake memes. You've got to keep it fresh. You've got to, and like I said, you don't necessarily have to use a brand new template, but using a template to remind them of content that maybe they haven't thought about, connecting it with that particular template. So going back to your question about, to people that sort of like, thinking about meme pages, like well, certainly for philosophy, I mean, you need a wide knowledge base. I mean, unless you just wanted to continue to make memes about Descartes and Kant puns,
Right, right, yeah.
you need to have that knowledge base and a wider awareness, excuse me, of philosophical issues and topics, and then once you have that background, then you can just sort of look at some of the templates that are out there, what some of the other meme pages are doing. And not that you're stealing ideas, but you want to see what's out there, and some other meme page might have a template that you weren't aware of, and you could
Yeah, yeah.
use that as inspiration for, oh, well, they did this with it, but maybe I can do something else with it. I can use that same template to make a different point. And that's why it's so important to have good relationships with these meme pages, because it's not uncommon behind the scenes for meme pages to say, hey, where'd you get that template? Just to ask them one another for clean copies of it, because of course, whenever I post the meme, it's not a clean copy, but I always have a clean copy of the image that I used. And so sometimes, sometimes another meme page will ask me for a clean copy. And then sometimes I'll ask another meme page for a copy. There's a meme page that is not philosophical that I follow. That's a strange hobbits lying in ponds distributing memes. And
I
and
think
that
I've seen that.
yeah,
Yeah.
he does a lot of stuff on comedy movies, Lord of the Rings themes primarily, but he ventures into Mel Brooks and Monty Python comedy movies more generally. And he's been very gracious in offering some of his templates. And because I don't always, because I do, this is, making memes is not my full-time gig. I'm a faculty
Yeah.
member. I teach a lot of classes. And so it is all the stuff that I'm doing. I'm just sort of doing, in a couple of hours in the morning, a couple of hours in the evening, and that's it. So it's really nice to have these guys that are exceptionally, talented in making their own templates and taking a five-panel template and converting it into a four-panel, excuse me, template that makes it easier to fit in with the size restrictions of Instagram and Facebook. That's the kind of stuff that strange hobbits lying in pods distributing memes will do. And he's been kind enough to offer me several templates.
I was going to ask, you know, I gather that both you and I share the idea of philosophy as not just being this narrow academic discipline, but having connections to all the other humanities and many other disciplines as well. And so it would make sense that, memes wouldn't just be like, neatly divisible into like, here's the philosophy memes, here's the history memes, here's the English literature memes, or something like that. But there'd be a lot of bleeding back and forth between them. And so, can we talk about like a larger, I don't know, what do you want to call it? Humanities slash sciences slash arts meme sharing community or memeverse or whatever we want to call it.
Yeah, it would be really great to have that, and that would sort of be very consistent with my own introduction to philosophy. I just in a recent post on my page, I made a comment about how it was the class that I took as an undergrad in the philosophy of science was one of just my favorite classes as an undergraduate, and it was that sort of merging of two different fields and sort of
Yeah.
seeing what philosophy can contribute to science and how science can be informed by a philosophical perspective, and it was really just sort of aligned with my own interest. And then of course when I first arrived at the community college where I'm presently at, I was in addition to my philosophy classes, I was tasked with teaching just a general introduction to the humanities class, and that was probably about a third or so existing material that I was already abundantly familiar with. But then there was a lot of that material about, literature and drama and theater. And
Yeah.
my knowledge of theater was pretty much limited to Sartre, Camus, Beckett, Jean Ennui, the figures like that that had
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
that the obvious connection to philosophy. But I was tasked with, teaching opera and theater, and that was sort of outside of my purview of my graduate training, and I really had to do a lot of work to get caught up on those. And again, the meme page is just seeing memes from those other fields. It's an entryway. It can spark, by the inherently educational aspect of it, of it's here's something, we're going to connect it to something you don't know, and you're going to understand the thing that you don't know through that imitation capacity.
Yeah, and when you put it like that, that's like something almost straight out of Aristotle's rhetoric.
Yeah.
Book three, where he's talking about us liking metaphors in part because learning is taking place with them. Um, so that's probably what provides some of the, I don't know, what do you want to call it, energy, spark,
Mhm.
interest that people do have in memes. I mean, we like comedic things just for their own sake. I mean, I suppose the limit of that would be slapstick comedy, the guy turning around with the board and hitting the other guy in the back of the
Right.
head. We do think that's funny,
Mhm.
weirdly enough, as human beings, but that's not conveying a ton of
Mhm.
information. The more sophisticated comedy is, the more ideas have to be involved and arranged in relation to each other. So maybe we can say something similar about these visual artifacts that we call memes.
Well, I wish I had more to say about that. I certainly the art as as imitation, and getting into that, and having that that connection, that moving from the known to the unknown. And
Yeah,
my colleagues in the art department, we share memes, that is like I share memes with them that sort of deal with the philosophy of art, and then they'll share art memes with me that they'll know that I'll get the reference
yeah,
on,
yeah.
because they're sort of they're curating, making sure that, oh well, you're going to understand what what the cubists were doing, or you're going to understand what the romanticists were doing, and then the connection to some American philosophy, people like Ralph Waldo Emerson, the transcendental idealist, and that sort of overlap between romanticism and transcendent, not transcendental idealism. Emerson, I misspoke there. Now I can't get that.
Well, the transcendentalism. Yeah, I mean,
The
and they,
transcendentalism, right?
I mean, they were getting idealism through Coleridge. He
Yes.
was like their main guy. So yeah,
Mhm. Yeah, and so that there's any memes that sort of appeal to that to that crossover. We do have a tendency to feed one another in that regard, and hopefully expanding the horizons of the other. There was a meme I had. This is probably a year or so back, and it was about Schelling, and
okay,
some of his concept of art, and the sort of the ineffability and the inability to define art as sort of what makes it artistic. And so it's just like, oh, I definitely got to share this meme with my colleagues in the art department. They're really going to like that. And so there is a lot of potential, cross fertilization that can exist there. That frankly, I haven't availed myself enough of that cross fertilization, because I've been so sort of laser focused on just providing content for my own page.
That raises a really interesting point that I think a lot of viewers might not be really that familiar with, unless they've gone to, say, like a community college or a small liberal arts college or something like that, which is that there are settings where interdisciplinary collegiality, collaboration, community is much easier to pull off than other settings. And I think about places where I've taught where the philosophy department usually doesn't have its own building, right? I mean, you'll have to share it with somebody else, religious studies,
Political
English or
science.
something. Yeah, exactly. But you're probably not in there with the business types, with the art and design types, with the music, with whatever else, the social sciences, the natural sciences. And so you don't get a lot of like talk with them. And actually, I'll tell you about one place that just blew my mind. So I've got a couple colleagues who are at St. John's University in Queens in New York. And I'd be like, "Hey, I know this person. Have you met them? Do you talk with them?" And their response was, "Nobody here knows anybody else. We come in, we teach. If we have to do committee stuff, we do that, and you don't meet any of your colleagues." And I was like, that sounds like hell to me. I like talking with people and not just philosophy people, but I'm the kind of guy who would like walk down the hall and chat with the poli sci or history or communication folks or stuff like that. If you're at a community college, I mean, some community colleges are literally just one building, one giant building, and everybody's in that, right? And then others might have a more extensive campus, but odds are your colleagues and you probably interact with them. One of the places that I teach, Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design, it is literally one building.
Mhm.
It's got five floors, and sooner or later you kind of get to know everybody. So not just in my case, the liberal studies changing to critical studies. They're doing a name change part, but also the industrial design people and the illustration people. And, you meet everybody, including the staff as well. And I think there's something really helpful to that, provided, you're not like a super introvert and can't stand, too many
Right.
people
Yeah,
involved with it.
one of the oddities of academia is always that you have coworkers that you never actually see work. You see them twice a year at faculty meetings. It's like they work, they teach, but you never actually see them in that environment. And
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
lucky at OTC. It's like our department is very engaged with one another. And in our department, is that we recently merged. So our department's now twice as big as it used to be.
Mm.
We have humanities, we have philosophy, we have religion, we have graphic arts, we
Oh,
have
wow.
we have media production, and I'm leaving something else out that I can't, because that merge is still relatively new, but
Yeah,
it's very or organic, in the sense that there's always more crossover and relatability than you realize. I remember, you on Facebook a couple of years back, if my memory serves, you were one of the themes for your class that you teach at Milwaukee Institute of Design is that you were talking about some of these Greek plays. And I think that you
oh,
had
right.
students do artwork for what would the artwork for this play, be, and sort of having your design students do that. And so now having philosophy mixed with fine arts and
Yeah, yeah,
humanities and graphic design, and it's like it is for those opportunities for collaboration and to see the connections that perhaps at first glance aren't there, but the whole idea of a university is like it's just it's
yeah.
fun. It's not a bunch of versity, it's a university. Right? It's like they're at a fundamental level, all studies are connected, and I think you just have to be open-minded enough to see that.
So, would it be safe to say, and I'm throwing this sort of out of left field, that in your view, if you want to be a good philosopher, you can't just be a philosopher. You can't just say, okay, I'm going to read this canon,
Yeah.
which we acknowledge as being central to philosophy, but I don't want to be distracted by any other nonsense outside of this purview. That would be a bad way to, or not the worst way. The worst way would be I'm only going to read secondary lit and it'll be the
Right.
crappiest stuff. Right.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I think so. I'm very sympathetic to that, and it's like one of my beloved undergraduate professors. Like he's now deceased. It's just I've been out of undergraduate school for so long. His name is Bertrand Helm, and he had this expression, in talking about people engaged in the study of philosophy. He said you should know something about every philosopher, and you should know everything about one philosopher. And I've really
both
I've
of those would be tough to pull off.
they're tough to pull off, but I
Yeah.
think it is aspirational. But it prevents you from getting sort of siloed into one, because there aren't any generalists anymore. And I think that most people outside of academic philosophy don't fully realize how,
Hmm.
if you talk to a philosopher about anything outside of their specialty, their knowledge drops precipitously. They're just sort of only aware of what their research interests are, and everything else they kind of ignore. And I understand it because of the publisher perish,
Right, right.
attitude. And it's like the way the institution kind of works, it does sort of force people, into that mindset. But I really think that they're missing out on the opportunity to have their work informed by these other traditions and perspectives.
Yeah, and perhaps also with the engagement with colleagues to get somebody else saying, hey, this might make sense to you philosophers, but the way that you're phrasing things, I don't know what these words mean. I'm not sure what your point here is. Can you tell me what this, because very often we use vocabulary, technical jargon that means we think it's got a one single clear meaning, but it turns out it means like 80 different things in different places. Analytic philosophy is particularly bad for this. What is externalism? Well, are we talking metaphysics? Are we talking ethics? Are we talking
Yes.
philosophy of mind? Because they all don't add up to each other. But you can find this with just about anything, any important term in the history of ideas. And so having colleagues to say, whoa, I don't know what the hell you're talking about here, buddy. I think that could actually be quite helpful, if they're doing it in a nice way, not just saying, oh, you're a dummy. I can't
Yeah.
understand you.
Yeah, I was at lunch with a colleague of mine from the religion department, a couple of months back, and like the topic of acrorasia came up, and
Hmm.
it was so funny to see the difference between the how theologians and religious studies people will address the topic of acrorasia versus what my, coming from, just no religious background, no religious
Yeah.
training, no religious education. It's like it was all secular versus all philosophy. And he was almost taken aback as to my, what I was saying about is like, well, this is how we cover it, and these are the works that we look at. This is how we cover it. These are things we say. And it was in, both of us were sort of enlightened as a result of, wow, it's just like I never realized that there was that sort of the spin you're giving to it. And I don't mean spin in a negative sense there.
Yeah.
The direction that you are approaching that and the way you are presenting that to your students is not a way that I would do in my classroom. And that feeling was reciprocal, with religious studies person I was talking to.
That makes sense. And even among philosophy stuff, I mean, we have so many different ways of teaching the same text, what we want to focus on, whether we're going to straight lecture. I mean, I don't really know anybody who does just straight lecture these days and, comes up with their written notes and then never shuts up or asks the student a question. But there's like a wide variety of ways that people uh, teach the same stuff. Even when we have like a standard curriculum. I mean, I should ask too. I mean, the one place outside of like really small liberal arts outlier schools where this is the lockstep way we do things, where you would expect to see kind of a standardized curriculum as far as texts is usually community colleges. Do you, when you're teaching classes, are you given, here's the textbook, here's the supplementary text you need to use, now you go do it, or do you have more leeway in or more input in deciding what you're going to teach to fulfill the requirements?
I have more liberty there. I have been at institutions where you show up and they just inform you, here's the textbook that you
Yeah.
that you will be using. But I do have more leeway than that. But I'm familiar with what you're describing there. But luckily, there is so much overlap in those. There's three dozen, if you go to Oxford University Press, Harvard University Press, Macmillan, they all, there's, 50 or so introductory to, textbooks in philosophy, and they're 90% the same,
Yeah.
in that. And so as long as you have your core set of, lectures, you just need to change the page citation on your lecture notes, is really about all you need to do. But I can't. I was on a monologue there, and I can't even remember what the intent of the original question was now. So I'm trying to data mine, trying to remember the direction that you were going with that question about the amount of control that I had over the textbook.
Yeah, do what you get to select. I mean, you're pointing out a really important thing, which is that you can be dictated and given, here's what you go get in your hand, but as an instructor, you really still do have some capacity to steer it in the directions you're interested in. I mean, it's different at some places where they tell you, here's the textbook, it's an online class, we've got the content, you're basically just checking discussion forums to make sure people are civil, answering questions, and then you can add stuff if you want to. I won't say names, but I did get into the process years back for a place like that, and they were like, yeah, whatever you want to add, you cannot subtract anything.
Yeah. Yeah, that we have had that, and whenever and thank goodness it wasn't like that whenever I got here in 2007. And when I say here, I'm pointing to my current desk. I'm in my office at the Ozarks Technical Community College. But prior to me coming here, there was this dean who dictated as to which textbooks you were going to use. And the only textbook for a philosophy 101 class at that time was Sophie's Choice,
Oh, really?
and that was required.
I
And
mean, it's not bad as a starting point, I
it's
guess.
not bad, but it would presuppose so much knowledge on the person who's using that text, because
Yeah.
there's within the text there's all kinds of opportunities to take a tangential discussion this way and a tangential discussion that way, and to bring in additional issues and themes. But if you did not have a wide background, then you would be very limited by that text that you were essentially forced to use.
Yeah.
And I've been in I've mentioned before, having taught at some community colleges whenever I was finishing up my graduate studies. The most graduate students pick up a gig as teaching
Yep.
an adjunct class, an evening class here and there while they're finishing up their graduate studies. And those were the ones where I would just sort of show up, and here's the text you'll be using. And I was teaching a class in we called it baby logic.
Okay.
It was like a critical thinking class, and so it wasn't the symbolic logic; it was informal fallacies,
Yeah. Yeah.
sort of thing. And I hated the textbook. It was I'm not exaggerating. It was cartoons.
Well,
It was just so dumbed down and spoon fed and just almost insulting. Just if it was for a sixth grade classroom, you would understand it. It's just like, this is post-secondary and it's cartoons, and you're expecting students to take it seriously whenever the author's not taking it seriously. And I
yeah. Yeah.
hated it. And it just, of course, I needed to teach the class. I needed the money. I was a poor graduate student. I was on assistantship, but the assistantship wasn't very much. The
Yeah.
assistantship was barely enough to pay my bills. And so if I had the opportunity to teach a 3-hour class for $1,200 is what they were paying at the time, it was
Oh.
like, hey, this is, well, now this is in late 1990s, early.
Oh, okay. Yeah, actually that's not
Yeah,
too bad then for
yeah,
that
yeah,
time.
yeah. Mhm.
I mean, if you were offered that today,
Oh, no, no. No, no way. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I taught at one place, every one of us, we did 4 4s, and you generally taught 4 critical thinking classes. That was at Fayetteville State University. And so, the department picked out a textbook. You didn't have any choice in it. You could be on the committee to select it the next time around. And it was the way most of these are. It wasn't great. It wasn't terrible. There were errors in it here and there that you'd have to like pick out and things like that. But you got pretty good at figuring out how not to make it mind-numbingly boring to
Yeah.
go over the same critical thinking stuff, which by itself is not like super intrinsically interesting. I mean, it
It
is
is.
interesting,
It
um,
I,
but doing it 4 times a day, you
yeah.
know?
Yeah, as a friend and former colleague of mine used to say, it's like there's just not a lot of meat on that bone.
Mm,
How do you stretch
right.
this out for 75 minutes? What am I going to be talking about? But I want to make a tangent here. You mentioned Fayetteville State University. I've taken classes at Fayetteville State
Right. I
University.
remember you saying that.
I was stationed at Fort Bragg in the early 1990s, and while I was at Fort Bragg, I took a couple of philosophy classes at Fayetteville State University.
So back, I mean, there wasn't any online stuff back then. So
No,
you actually like left the post and
no,
then you'd go to
no. They
the,
actually they brought people to post,
oh,
and so
okay, okay.
this was 2 nights a week. So they would just turn over some of the administrative buildings, and so then I would just go. So I stayed on post, and they just brought in probably an adjunct. Looking back, at the time I didn't draw a distinction. If you're a student in a
Right.
class, all you know is this person is is the faculty member and is in charge of the class. But looking back, it's like, oh yeah, that was a retired somebody who was picking up a part-time gig.
Yep.
uh, but yeah. So I've taken you and I have been at the same institution. Probably wasn't any overlap. That would have been probably
No,
1994.
I was there from 2008 to 2011.
Okay, yeah. So that was
And
well after my time there. Yeah.
yeah, but we did have students who came from Fort Bragg, and we had a lot of military dependents, of course,
Yeah.
because it's a huge base. And I suspect too that as they closed more and more bases, Fort Bragg probably increased in the number of people who were stationed there too,
Yeah, I left Fort Bragg in 1996, so I have zero knowledge of as to what happened since then. My undergraduate studies were I did 6 years in the Army, and you were in the Marines, right?
No, no, I was in the Army, but I wasn't in
You
that
are.
long. I
Okay.
got in 89, and then while I was over in Germany, the wall came down, the Velvet Revolution happened, the Soviet Union started to like break up slowly. And so by 1990, there was what was called the peace dividend.
Mm.
And so they were like, well, we don't have to spend so much money on the military now. And it's interesting because they made a choice. They could have kept everybody, all the troops everywhere, but they were like, well, we want to keep buying all these weapon systems. These are much more expensive than retaining personnel. So by the time that I left, my unit was down to 65% strength.
Oh, yeah.
And engineer units are usually chronically under strength anyway. You got, instead of having 11-man squads, you have 8-man squads, but they're expected to do everything a 11-person squad would do and have all this extra equipment and stuff that you got to keep track of and carry around. And so this is really off topic, but you might get a kick out of it. I saw E7s who were getting written up on like totally BS things so that they could kick them out and not pay them
Oh, yeah.
pensions.
Yeah. Mhm.
And I talked with some people who had been officers at the time later on, and I was like, we always heard there was like a quota system, but nobody confirmed that. And they were like, oh, yeah, there was a quota system.
Yeah.
And so, there was like almost like an open call. They're like, all right, who wants to go home? And I was like, well, this isn't what I signed up for. I'll go. And, because you go in, you're going to be combat troops, and you find that you spend a lot of time buffing floors and painting the walls and picking up cigarette butts and, stuff
They're,
like that. And you're like,
they're, they're
yeah,
they're not showing a whole lot of respect for the individual, and that's what I was starting to
exactly.
say.
Yeah.
Whenever I did my undergraduate career was sort of split up 2 years before 6 years of military service, and then
Oh,
two,
interesting.
2 years
Okay.
after it. And part of my reason in joining the Army for that 6 year enlistment is I had recently taken this history course that was all about the New Deal, and I was very inspired by Harry Hopkins and just this
Okay.
notion that everybody you owe some service to your country, and I was very inspired by that, and I firmly genuinely did join the military with that in mind. And like you were saying, you join it, and what you think you're going to be doing and what you're actually going to be doing is this is the service to my country.
Yeah, yeah.
This is how the Army thinks my time is best spent. And so I always sort of knew that I was going to just do that 1 6 year enlistment and get out. But if I hadn't already made up my mind, I would have made up my mind very quickly. It's like, this is not for me. And so I did, after that 6 year enlistment, I went back and finished up the undergraduate. So I actually graduated high school in 1988, and went
That's
to,
when I graduated. Yeah.
yeah. We have several, intersections in our career and what we've done. It's like, because you mentioned that you've taught at prisons before. I've taught at prisons before. But yeah, so I did 2 years undergraduate, joined the Army, and then I decided anything was better than the Army, and went back to finish up my undergraduate studies, and then of course on to grad school after that.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because when I got out, they weren't retaining anybody. And then so when did Desert Shield start? Like in June, July of 1990. Um, Nobody could get out. Nobody could retire, and all these units that were like totally under strength, somehow they had to be filled up,
Mhm.
So, and I think, if I had gone to Desert Shield and Desert Storm, I don't know, maybe I would have stayed in or something, but then again, the sort of incompetence that you see routinely in the Army,
Yeah.
particularly as the further up you go, your NCOs are usually not too bad. Your officers, you wonder what the hell their brains are
No,
filled with,
no. In defense of the military, you see that in
Yeah,
academia and every other
that's
institution.
true. Yeah,
So
administrators, yeah.
it is not limited to that.
C-suite executives, true.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's something about that. But yeah, I mean, I don't know that I would have actually stayed in um had I actually been in wartime either, because who knows what silly nonsense would have been going on. But coming back to the meme thing as we sort
Yeah,
of wrap up. So this is a very open-ended question, purely speculative. We've got this current configuration of the internet that's a bit of a moving target, but we're all kind of used to it, I think, at this point, right? You got these big companies that have platforms. We've got, videos. We've
yeah.
got, video conferencing apps and stuff like that. And sometimes people are like, oh, you're creating this great, video archive. And I'm always like, I don't know that YouTube's going to be around 20 years from now. It might be something totally different. And maybe people won't be watching videos. Maybe they'll be doing something else. So, we can probably expect another good 30, if we're really lucky, 40 years of lifespan ahead. What do like with the memes that you're producing, you think they're going to be around as memes? Is that like a format that has managed to stick? Like think about email. Email's never going away, probably, right? That's successful. The meme format for conveying ideas, you think that's going to be around for a long time? Or is this sort of like, LPs where, there's some people who like records and will buy them, but most people aren't listening to music on that. They're streaming.
Yeah, that isn't something that I've thought about. But I'll make a conjecture. But I want to go back and talk about something that you had mentioned earlier about about like the digital archive. That I've
Okay.
encountered that in my classes because there's certain because I used to include a lot of links to videos from the series Philosophy Bites, and for some reason just like those links will just stop working, and it's just like,
Mm,
well, I know there's this interview. I know Nigel Warburton, he interviewed so and so about this topic, and it'll be there one day, and then the next semester it's the same link, and yet the content is gone. And so it's just the technology, you think it's stable and you think
yeah,
it's
yeah.
going to be there. And it's just because you are sort of beholden to, it's just like once you upload a video to YouTube, you just sort of, you hope it stays there. Maybe you are keeping actual files of all of your
Oh,
past catalog of video.
I do. And I don't know, did you see what happened with Brian Van Norden about a
No,
year ago? So
no.
he's this really important Chinese philosophy guy and does really great work and all that. He had a video channel, and YouTube, for some reason, decided that he'd crossed some lines, which obviously he hadn't because he's a very nice guy. And they took his channel down,
Mhm.
and he hadn't had anything backed up.
All that
And he
content.
went through the steps of, let me appeal, let me find out what's going on. And they just totally stonewalled him. So
Yeah.
he went on Twitter and he posted about it, and he's like, this is terrible. I really should have backed up my videos, but now they're gone. And enough people like got on YouTube's case where they reinstated his channel. But if somebody didn't have enough juice like that,
Right.
it's gone, and YouTube will never put it back.
Right. And
So
they
so
have the
you
mechanism. Yeah.
yeah, so you got to keep backups, and probably backups of backups.
Yeah. So with that topic addressed, yeah, there is some concern as to, because the usually with my memes, once I post them to Facebook, I erase my local copy, and so
Oh, really?
yeah, I do. And part of that is because a lot of my followers, they don't look backward. Again, they're only looking forward.
Okay.
They're not once they sign up for once they sign up and follow the page, my internal data tells me that they're only looking at that there are very few of them. Every once in a while, I'll have a new follower that'll just go back and mow through and give a like to 800, 900 memes, throughout a 4 year history here. But most of them, you get one like, one follow, and they wait for the next one.
Yeah.
So at the one hand, I am a little bit concerned. I have my favorite memes, and I probably should, make some sort of digital, catalog just for my own purposes of those. But to the second part of your question about, where are we at going forward with memes? Like I started the interview, is like, the relationship between meme and mimesis. There's always been some version of it. So I don't think that I don't think it's going away. With the how enduring it is going to be in its current mode,
Hmm.
is highly dependent upon people's relationship with their handheld devices. Memes are just
Okay.
it's just a quick dose of entertainment. They can pull out their phone, they can look at it, they can get a laugh, they'll text it and send it to a friend, and they'll share it that way. And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think I think that as long as people are tethered to their devices and are still engaged, even in face-to-face communication, people pull out their phones and they'll say, "Look
Yep.
at this," and so it's not it hasn't replaced human communication. If anything, it's been an adjunct to the way we communicate. And I think that as long as that as long as we have the current handheld device situation that we have, I think they'll be around. If it ever gets to the point where we have implants or Google Glass, where it's no longer a handheld device that you can sort of hold up in somebody's face and show them something, maybe then the memes and the modality of communicating through memes might change at that
Yeah.
point. But kind of with you, I think we got another 3-4 decades, coming to us with this. With the idea of memes, and still people sharing memes.
Yeah. There was one other thing I wanted to ask you
Mm.
before we sort of completely wrap up. Do you have, I mean, you've probably seen tens of thousands of memes. Do you have like a favorite meme, one that like, sticks with you, you still chuckle over every time that you see it? Or is it more like, well, I've seen so many, there's no one that stands out like that.
I still get great enjoyment out of I think it's called quick draw bugs. That one, it's Bugs Bunny. He's in the cowboy hat and he's got
Okay.
slouched back posture on a bar, and the way it's used in memes, like somebody will say something that he doesn't like, and then he responds to it by doing a quick draw, pulling out his gun. No, I think that's given away my age. It's like I'm 53 years old. I grew up watching Bugs Bunny
Yep,
roast
yep.
for an hour, and so I like seeing I like seeing the old Tom and Jerry memes. I like seeing the Bugs Bunny memes. Poke up. But I like almost every version of those. They always bring a smile to my face, and I do attribute that more to the nostalgia than any inherent quality to the actual messages.
Well, I think that's a great reason, one that maybe makes more sense than being like, objectively, this meme has the greatest humor content or
Right.
something like that. Yeah. So is there anything else that you wanted to bring up about your work, about your ideas about things that we didn't get to?
No, I don't think so. But again, I wanted to thank you for the content that you provide. I've relied on it, a lot for my classes, and I think I've even said in some captions to memes that I posted on the Facebook page about the debt of gratitude that I owe you, and how one of the reasons
Oh,
why I tag you in so many things and incorporate your resources in those memes, trying to generate some traffic to your page, is out of that debt of gratitude that I genuinely feel to you, in terms of the amount of content that you have provided, not just to the general public, but then I've been able to, to curate and to utilize as resources for the classes that I teach online. And I've had several students reach out to me at the end of the semester thanking me for the abundance of additional
hmm.
resources. Because not only do I have my own lecture videos, but again,
Yeah,
I'll get
yeah.
7, 8 different resources, some of them audio, some of them video. About each topic, and so it's nice that we have someone with your knowledge base and conscientious approach to the material, and your ability to present that material. That I think that there was you had recently shared on Facebook I think it was either a tweet or a Facebook post by Nigel Warburton, who was asking a question about, well, what we should have, this idea of, philosophers, taking up these absurd positions and seeing if they're genuine in their belief about it. And you had responded to it saying something to the point where, something to the effect of, it's like, well, people just have a tendency to automatically assume if you're saying it, then it's your
Oh,
position.
right, right, right. Yeah, yeah.
That is something that you encounter. Is like, if you're actually teaching the material in a non-biased way, people think you're biased in favor of it.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because you perceive yourself as approaching it is like, all I'm trying to do is approach the material. I'm just trying to present the material. And the more non-biased you are, the more people think you're biased in favor of it. I've had, so many, students, think that I have an attitude, I'll teach the youth of pro, and people think that I have this anti-religious,
Yep, yep.
attitude. I will teach, talk about, Robert Nozick and his criticism of Rawls. Oh, well, he just hates Rawls, And it's
Yep,
like,
yep.
I'm not talking about me. There wouldn't be any point in having a course in my opinions. I'm talking about what Nozick said. But if all you do is give a faithful representation of the person that you're teaching, people automatically think that you have sympathies toward that person. And it is interesting as to how frequently that takes place, and how hard it is to try to convince people that, no, I'm not. I'm not, just because I talk about Hegel doesn't make me a Hegelian. Just because I talk about Kant doesn't make me a Kantian.
I think part of that comes from the assumption that if you're willing to put in the work to, I don't know, create a digital product like a podcast or a video, or even a meme, or like, a blog post, you must think that it's worthwhile because the person is right. Right.
Right.
Not that it's worthwhile because, hey, it's good to study things. So yeah.
Well,
I yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, there's this. I think it's Aristotle. But I don't know where he said it. But something to the effect of, it is the mark of an educated mind to entertain an idea without accepting it.
See,
And
I think that might be a fake quote.
is it a
Because
fake quote? It's
because
I'm not the
I
correct
can't
person.
recall ever having seen that,
I've never seen
in
it
his
either. I've
works,
seen it
but
widely attributed to him.
yeah, yeah. I
And
mean, it's not a bad idea, right? Whether it's Aristotle or not,
and
it's
it sounds like something he would say, but
yeah,
I
kinda.
I have not seen it, in his extant works.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
maybe we can give viewers of this a homework assignment to do it. See if they can do some internet sleuthing to find out if that actually is an Aristotle quote or not. But whether it was original to Aristotle or not, I do like the idea, and it's
Yeah.
something that that I think that more people should be cognizant of and thinking of. It's like, you can, just because you read a book doesn't mean that you have to agree with, the person. And just because you're talking about an idea doesn't mean that you're fully accepting of the idea. And the that that little move from exposition to criticism. I think that just because you're giving exposition and not giving any criticism, that doesn't mean that you have an uncritical attitude
That's right.
toward
Yeah.
the person. And I think that that distinction is lost. Is like he didn't say anything negative. He's in support of this person.
That raises another interesting issue. So like if I do a series of videos, 7 videos on a particular text, um, sometimes people will comment on one of the videos, hey, you didn't cover this idea from the text. And I'll be like, well, that's not what we're talking about right here. This is a video just specifically on this idea. Why don't you check out the other videos that we've got available for you that do in fact talk about that. But I think there's an assumption that if you're going to treat something, it's got to be like the treatment, right? Rather than, here's a little bit here, a bit here, a bit here. I mean, you wouldn't take a book that has chapters and be like, well, in chapter 1, they didn't fulfill all the promises that they made in the introduction
Right.
about, what the 10 chapters are going to provide, right?
Yeah.
So,
And to dovetail with that, I think that you had made a video a while back, and I can't remember as to what series it was for, but you were talking about the whether it's important or not for an author to be consistent.
oh, right,
Something to
right.
that. It's just like,
Yeah.
well, yeah, this is what they said, but they acted a different way, or this is how they're presenting, the argument, but there's all these other problems of, internal consistency. And the gist of what you were saying was, philosophers are human beings. They
Yeah,
are
where the hell do you find anybody who's
right,
perfectly consistent, right?
consistently logical and methodological in the presentation of their ideas. Yeah, and so the fact that you might that Aristotle had sort of two different conceptions of the so-called
Mm.
unity of the virtues. He's sort of suggested it over here, but in other places he talks like it's like there's no such unification. It's like, well, maybe somebody could possess one virtue, and people are using that
Yeah,
as
yeah.
criticism of Aristotle. And I think your attitude is like, yeah, it's not really a criticism. I mean, Aristotle's a human being. It's just like maybe he was a little bit loose in speaking here, but that in and of itself doesn't mean that he's a bad philosopher or criticism. It just means he's a human being like the rest of us.
I think there's a lot of people who do expect if you're publishing something in philosophy, you must have like totally thought about everything or else you wouldn't have published it. Right?
Yeah.
And again, like who the hell does that? Right?
Yeah, well, and then there's that connection between the word author and the word authority. Just like, well,
Right, right, right.
an author makes you an authority, and so if you're an authority, then everything you say should be well regimented and connected to every other aspect of what you're saying. And it's too high of a standard. It's like you're always going to be crestfallen and upset, at whoever you're reading if that's what you're expecting to find, because it just won't be there.
And that's the really problematic issue with it is that people trip themselves up into being dismayed, despairing because they've invested. I mean, it's sort of the thing in the Phaedo, right? That Socrates was talking about with mythology. You treat human beings as if they're like gods, and then you're disappointed when they behave like human beings. Same thing with logoi, you
Mhm.
can't expect too much out of any one single logos, or you're going to get disappointed, and then you're going to be like, it's all crap, and we don't want that to happen to people. You know, we don't want them to make other people dismayed, but we don't want it's a bad thing for them to make themselves feel bad when they don't have to,
Yeah. Mhm.
Well, we should wrap up. You've been very, very generous with your time. Great, far-ranging conversation. Should mention, the page is pedagogical memes on philosophical themes, and everybody should go out and check it out and maybe like some of the memes, and yeah, that's I think a good place to end it. Do you want to say any last words before we wrap up, or?
No, just thanks again to my followers for their high quality contributions, and thank you for having me on here.
Oh, sure.
Like I said off camera at the beginning, it was hard for me not to fanboy. I've been videos for 10 plus years, and to have this conversation with you is just kind of surreal for me. So thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, you're very welcome, and thanks so much for joining us.
Okay, thank you.